everyone's screaming fire, fire, and I turned my head and I saw the window, and outside the window there was flames, and the window began to bubble and melt. And I honestly thought, I hope this plane doesn't explode right here. I just thought, could this be it? You know, it was absolutely terrifying.
Ooh, so scary. Today we're hearing more from passengers on the American Airlines plane that caught fire at a DIA gate. There are a lot of questions about what happened, so we're going to continue our coverage with our 9 News aviation expert, Greg Feith. We know the investigation is going to focus on the fire, but when you hear them tell that, that's the really big concern, right? Because of fuel on the plane?
Absolutely. It's very evident that there was a pool of fuel underneath that engine. That's why there was a ground fire. And that could be a concern because as that fire grows, the fuel tank sits in that wing right below the engine, or above the engine. So that is a big concern. And when you have people evacuating now onto a wing, you can, of course, have a real problem.
Okay, first of all, I have to ask this. A lot of people have asked this. Can the wing support a bunch of people standing on it?
Yes, absolutely. You're talking about thousands of pounds of fuel in that wing. The structure is very stout. So putting, 50 people on the wing is not a problem for the structure itself.
I'd imagine that with the investigation, they're going to try to figure out, okay, what was checked before the flight? What was looked at? And I would imagine there's probably a high number of things that could lead to something like this.
There are, and flight crews are required, as all pilots are required, to do a pre-flight of their aircraft. So you'll see the pilot walk around the aircraft looking for obvious damage, abnormalities, things like that. The problem with looking in an engine is you can only see the front side of the engine, the big fan blades. You can't see what's going on further in the engine. If they picked up a piece of FOD during takeoff, that is foreign object damage, they picked up a rock or something that was on the runway, you can actually damage the core of the engine. That spins at 25 to 30,000 RPM. You nick a blade, you get a very big imbalance in the engine. They had a high vibration, and that's probably what led them to then deviate to Denver International.
So you were saying they probably chose Denver because Denver would have the crews to manage this, but it's unclear if they notified them how serious this was. And did they not see the fire until they actually landed? And why did they go all the way to the gate?
They didn't perceive what was going on in flight with this vibration issue as a threat. It was a vibration. They reduced the power on that to reduce the vibration. It's kind of like having an out-of-round tire. The slower you go, of course, the thumping slows down or stops. You go fast, and that's what was happening. So they pulled the power back, they landed, everything was normal on the landing. It wasn't until the taxi-in. The problem is that there was a fuel line most likely breached by some sort of damage in the core of the engine. That's what led to the fire. Now the question for the board, the NTSB, is to determine the timeline. When did the crew notice that they had a fire issue? Because there is a red handle called the fire handle in the cockpit. It lights up red. It tells you, you got a fire. You typically will pull that handle to then put the fire suppression into the engine. The problem is that if this is a fuel fire on the outside of the engine, the fire suppression will not put it out.
Yeah. And at that point, it's, you're relying on the crews on the ground to come in.
Absolutely. And in this case, the ground crew was very astute. They were able to not only, identify what was going on, but then get fire extinguishing agent into the bulk of the fire and put it out.
Last but not least, one of the things you always tell people, count the seats to an exit, because if you're on that plane and smoke comes in inside the plane, you got to feel your way to the exit. Right?
Absolutely, because now all of a sudden your visibility goes away and the only thing you have is touch. And in this case, because they were at the gate, they had very limited access to a lot of the exits. So that was very important for them to find the nearest exit. And in this case, it was an overwing exit. The good thing is they went out the left side, not the right side where the fire was.
Okay. All right. We had to get that all in.
Thank you, Greg Feith.
All right. Thank you.